Andreas, tell us all about the UK-Norway Initiative.
Absolutely, sure. It's an initiative that was founded in 2007 by a number of Norwegian and UK research institutions. On the Norwegian side you had institutes such as the Defence Research Establishment, the Norwegian Radiological Protection Authority, NORSAR, who handles their seismic array, and on the UK side you had the Ministry of Defence as an active partner and the Atomic Weapons Establishment out in Reading. In addition, VERTIC was asked to join as an independent observer to this initiative, so we were both the facilitator in the beginning, and then later on we became the organization that was tasked to report on it.
So what exactly was the purpose of the initiative, and how did it carry out its work?
Well, the purpose was to, in a very technical way, to examine verification solutions that could be applied to warhead dismantlement in support of future efforts to verifiably reduce nuclear arsenals. This is an area where a lot of work has been going on over the decades. The UK had been coming out of a study series that they started in 1998 and finished in 2005 looking at these issues, and they were keen to explore more because there are a lot of issues that are not immediately obvious actually that needs to be explored and resolved. For instance, how do inspectors get access to one of these facilities? What about, as just another example, what about health and safety concerns? These are high explosive areas and so on and so forth. And of course, what about proliferation concerns? What if an inspector, say from Norway, comes across sensitive information relating to nuclear weapons manufacture? How do you handle that? So there are a lot of issues that just needs to be played out, and the idea was to do this in this setting. It was also unique in the sense that it involved for the first time ever a non-nuclear weapon state looking at these issues. It had before that time been mostly a nuclear weapon state affair, often internal domestic studies, more often than not by the United States and their hugely developed laboratory infrastructure. Of course there had been other collaborations in the past, but mostly again between the United States and Russia. So you had, for instance, preparations for the START Treaty, you had what's known as the Trilateral Initiative, which involved US, Russia and the IAEA, but really not so many more actors than that.
Yeah. And as part of the programme, did any inspection type activities actually take place?
Yes, the UK-Norway Initiative quite early on decided that they wanted to look at two discrete research strands. The first one related to a device which they called the information barrier, and this is essentially just a gadget, if you will, that takes a measurement that is classified and then filters it so that you can get an unclassified kind of measurement on the other side, if I explain it very simply. So that an inspector could use this device and then see whether or not the item that he's looking at contains, in this case, plutonium. We didn't actually use plutonium in the exercises. We used a surrogate material because the plutonium composition and so on in the UK was deemed too sensitive to work on. But also there were other concerns such as, how do you tell the regulator that you want to have access to a set amount of plutonium to play around with? This is very controlled. This is a very controlled material, so it would have been a hassle just to get the necessary permits. So that was another aspect of this. And then we looked at what we called managed access provisions, but it was really an exercise into on-site inspection methodology at the end of the day. We looked at how an inspector can get access to a facility, at what he can see, how he can move, how he would need to be escorted, what kind of activities that the inspector can observe, what kind of containers and doorways that he can seal and tag, where they can put up cameras and so on and so forth in one of these nuclear facilities. Now, obviously we couldn't get access to the AWE itself to do this kind of work, because again, just filling out the paperwork would take probably a couple of years and get the necessary clearance to do this type of work. So we set up a training ground in Norway instead. And it sounds a bit cartoonish, but the idea is actually quite simple. The UK side, the AWE in particular, they were tasked to set up a dismantlement flow, a description of what happens when you dismantle a nuclear warhead on a technical level. Vet that from all the technical detail that could be potentially proliferative, and then hand that over to the Norwegian side and to us. What we then did was to look at an existing Norwegian facility and kind of overlay this schematic on top of that, thus creating a relatively believable training ground, if you will. In fact, some of the participants on the UK side who participated in this exercise, which were then eventually held after about 2 years preparation, we actually held two. But we held one really big one, lasted for 1 week. The UK participants even said that it was more believable than some of the exercises that they've done inside the AWE, and I suppose that's a pretty good score.
Great. And what were some of the main lessons that were discovered as a result of the initiative?
I think there were many lessons. Some of them are fairly new. I wouldn't say that we came to a breakthrough of any. It wasn't a revolutionary discovery of something new. A lot of it proved concepts that were already known but perhaps not explored, such as the information barrier concept was proved to work in principle and in practice, at least with the surrogate, using the surrogate material. We also confirmed, I believe, that it's possible for non-security cleared type personnel to get access to this kind of activities and participate to inspect them, and while doing so actually get some sort of confidence that this has been done, as the state has said, that is that a actual nuclear warhead has been dismantled. We couldn't assign metrics to this, and I think this was a slight disappointment. It would have been nice to say that, at the end of an inspection exercise like that, there is a 90% confidence that the actual item has been dismantled. But we couldn't really do that. We had an exercise item, but only one, and in order to do that, you really need to have a methodology in place so that you can replicate this exercise several times and have some sort of a statistically good measurement. An interesting thing that I think will more or less agreed towards the end is the use of CCTV cameras. And as you know, Aldermaston and other facilities are kind of allergic to anything, even that has a lens. It's very difficult to get them to understand that you can actually point it at one direction and this camera can only see that. They always assume that the camera is all seeing, and I think if you have a security perspective, perhaps that's a good precaution. But it's very difficult to get them to agree to this, and in this exercise the UK actually suggested the use of CCTV cameras to supplement the verification process, and that's something obviously that needs to be looked into greater detail, because that would facilitate and help verification quite a lot if you're allowed to bring this type of technology in there. And another good conclusion was that it's possible to do this kind of work with relatively low-tech solutions. So you can tag and seal an item quite early on in the dismantlement chain. Say that you can witness, an inspector can witness a weapon being withdrawn from deployment and then being put in a case, if you will, that is then sealed up and tagged properly. If the inspector then can just maintain chain of custody over that item, it's a higher assurance that that is a bona fide warhead than if it just arrives at the gates of the dismantlement facility. And I think this can also be done, and the studies, or at least the discussions we had in the wash-up sessions after the exercises, indicates that this is something that one could look at in the future. And
finally, any views as to the possible future direction for the UK-Norway Initiative?
Well, I mean, from our perspective, I think it's been important. It's been an important start, but there is a lot more that needs to be done. This is a huge area to work in. The number of questions that you're faced with, that you need to find an answer to, are overwhelming. So, I mean, at the present, we're looking at an arms control verification team in Aldermaston of, I believe, 5 people, who is tasked to do this full time, but you know, it's not a lot of manpower or people power in that, to use that term. And of course, if you look at the wider community as such, the number of verification specialists looking exclusively at this problem is a handful of people. So, I mean, one good way forward is to start to build a larger community of people committed to this kind of problems and finding the answers. This involves obviously getting them funded, because otherwise, you know, they can't go home and feed their families, and that has to be done. So there has to be a kind of a political direction, political will to also look at this seriously. I think the UK can do more. I was quite pleased to see that they announced that they're going to continue this work, but I think they can also consider not only continuing but radically enlarging it. And I think that would be the best possible outcome in the future.
Andreas Persbo, thank you very much.
Thank you.